By request of the meeting organizer, this meeting is being recorded.
This is the Architecture and Design General Operating Support webinar for the New York State Council on the Arts. That's me. I'm the Arts Program Director for Architecture and Design in Museums, just wearing my Architecture and Design hat this morning. And that is my email and my direct line, which will appear at the end of the webinar as well. Design is everywhere, from the Montauk Lighthouse to Buffalo's Olmsted Parks, from Manhattan skyscrapers to Adirondack camps, from Russell Wright tableware to Tiffany jewelry. New York State boasts testaments to the importance of design in the world around us. Architecture and design supports organizations and individuals working to further innovation and excellence in the design arts, to promote the preservation of New York State's architectural and design heritage, and to encourage the development of design literacy for all New Yorkers. I wanted to start by making sure that you're in the right meeting because I'm hosting a number of webinars this week. Today's webinar focuses on organizations that either intend or are interested in submitting an application for general operating support to the Architecture and Design Program of the New York State Council on the Arts for the fiscal year 2017 funding cycle, which is a calendar year contract, January to December 2017. Folks who apply for operating support are applying for multi-year support, so that will continue on for those who are successful beyond 1 year. If you are an organization that's already receiving general operating support and your grant is an active multi-year, you're in the second year of it, for example, then this seminar is not for you. You will have to register your grant, but you will not have to submit a new application. This webinar is focused on those who have to submit new applications this year. And I want you all to just please be aware or be reminded that if you are applying for general operating support in architecture and design, or you are receiving it already, that is the only request you may submit in this program, unless you are sponsoring an individual in our individual artist or independent projects program, which I will not be discussing during this webinar. So project support is not an option if you are applying for or receiving general support, unless that project support is in a different NYSCA program. So if you're not sure if your organization is on multi-year for general operating support or not, here's how you can identify that. One way is to check your original NYSCA contract, which should detail your contract period. The other way is to log into our website at arts.ny.gov with your login, your username, password, and review your NYSCA portfolio. If your funding for fiscal year 2016 shows up as 2 of 2, 3 of 3, 4 of 4, or 5 of 5, or if it, in rare cases, shows up with no multi-year listed at all, then your contract has concluded. You should apply again, and this is the right webinar for you. And if you're still not sure, you can shoot me an email, kristin.herron@arts.ny.gov. My name has 2 I's in my first name, and my surname has 2 R's. Just shoot me an email, and I'll help you later on. So some of you, I know from the list of participants, since I know who's on this call, some of you are organizations that have applied to NYSCA for general operating support for a number of years. Some of you are new to this process or are just exploring whether or not you should apply. So I wanted to address if this category of funding, general operating support, is the right place for your organization. General operating support is available in all programs at NYSCA, and all programs have this first paragraph as a statement that we reward exemplary practice in all areas of administration, finance, programming, and public service. We're essentially looking at the entirety of your organization when you apply for general operating support. We are looking for an organization that is strong in all areas. This is a place for you to think critically about your organization if you are not sure about general operating support. If your organization is not as strong in one of those areas, you may wish instead to come in for project support, where we analyze your ability to manage that project as opposed to the entirety of your operation. The other thing you need to make sure if you're new on this call, your primary mission must be in architecture and design, and specifically in one of the fields that we support: architecture, landscape architecture, historic preservation, fashion, graphic, industrial, or interior design. And you must have ongoing programs, exhibitions, or other arts and cultural activities which are open to the public. So if any of you on this call are not sure if you fit, you're welcome to stay. You can join in on the project support. You can ask me questions later. Here are some situations where your organization would not be the right fit for general operating support. If your organization is not primarily focused on one of the design fields I mentioned, or any of the priorities that are supported by this program, which were from the beginning: design excellence, design literacy, and the promotion of the preservation of New York State's design heritage. If your organization is not primarily an arts or cultural organization, if your mission is something else, but you do some arts and cultural programming, GOS may be the wrong place for you. If your organization offers national programs, your profile is not just New York State, GOS is not the place for you. We can still fund your organization, but only for your activities that take place in New York State, in which case you would call in later today for the project support category, where I can talk about those organizations that bundle their education or interpretive programs in a single application. If you're an organization who's substantially involved in the restoration or maintenance of a property or landscape, this is also not the place for you. You might look instead to the offerings of the New York State Office of Parks, Historic Preservation, and Recreation. That funder may be the right fit for you. If your organization lacks a salaried full or part-time administrative staff, you are also not eligible to apply for general operating support. We require at least one full or part-time staff member to be salaried, not just contract. If your organization lacks a viable, committed board of directors, general operating support is not the place for you. And if you have substantial organizational deficits, you should think twice about applying for general operating support. If you're running substantial operating deficits, not only will our panel not be able to rate your application very highly in the managerial fiscal section that I'll discuss later, but New York State has a number of very detailed requirements related to management, systems that analyze whether an organization is viable, and if you're running heavy deficits, the state may not be able to fund you anyway. Again, if you're one of those, not to harp on the negative, but if your organization fits any of these that we can't fund in GOS, I encourage you to look at project support. Sorry, I went too fast. The New York State Council on the Arts, for those of you not aware, was established in 1960. We provide competitive grants in 16 program areas, so more than just architecture and design. They are all listed here. Last year, the agency funded over $40 million through these 16 programs. If you are applying to architecture and design for either general operating support or project support, you can also submit a second request in one of these programs if it fits your mission and your activities. So the question everyone really wants to know probably is how much your organization can request. General operating support grants will be no less than $5,000 and may not exceed 25% of an organization's budget. based on the income and expense statement for the organization's most recently completed fiscal year. And these are general multi-year awards. In the architecture and design program, recent awards have ranged from $12,000 to $50,000. So I want to speak a little bit about this request amount. Again, what's tricky here is that you're not applying for, I'm applying for X amount of dollars. It's based very much on your organization's operating budget and how well your request fares in our analysis. This is in part because in order to present to the Comptroller's Office in New York State a logical decision on funding awards, I have to balance the fact that I have some very small organizations and some very large organizations that apply. So it's sort of a sliding scale of percentage. The larger you are, it's a smaller percentage of your operating budget, and the smaller you are, it's a higher percentage of your budget, generally not more than maybe 8 to 9%. Although NYSCA can fund up to 25% of an organization's budget, I simply don't have the money to go that high for anyone, so the reality is that it's a much smaller percentage. I will say in terms of the awards, there are a number of organizations in this program that are serving the state or serving a larger region of the state. And I do make a case when I have to present this very logical explanation of the funding awards. I do make a case for those organizations that serve a larger community, a regional or statewide audience, to receive a little higher percentage of their operating budget. That's not to be unfair to those of you who are not, it's just that when the service area is much larger and thus the money is going further, that's the case that is made. I want to note something very important. That is that your past funding from NYSCA does not guarantee you will be supported in any given year, and that what you received in the past is not indicative of what you may receive in the future. So what does that mean? It means that the application you're submitting, that narrative and those supporting documents are the primary means by which our peer review panel analyzes your request and makes funding decisions. Information in the public domain they can include. So for example, you're up for general operating support, your executive director leaves and there's a search in place and that's publicly known. That won't be in your application, but we're going to know it because it's out there in the world. We do not include any additional updates that you want to send beyond the deadline that are not in the public domain, nor do we include information that someone may know only because they have a contact at that organization. It's only public information that we can add beyond your application. And what's so critical is that narrative you present and telling the full story of your organization. I have seen organizations not get funded because their application is not providing that compelling story. Organizations that have been funded by NYSCA for years. They don't score high enough and they don't meet the cutoff to be funded. I also want to address that last statement, past grant funding amounts are not indicative of future funding levels. So you always want to ask for more than you think NYSCA is going to give you, because we can't give you, if you're successful, more than you've asked for. So don't sell yourself short. But there is no promise that whatever you received last time, you're going to go higher this time if your assessment is positive. So when you hear from me at the end of all this, if your application was successful, and I say, congratulations, you've received X amount of money, and your heart falls because it's less than before, that doesn't mean you're doing a bad job. It means based on how much money I have in my budget, based on how many applications came in, based on how many of those applications were strong enough to get funded, I have to thus divide the money up based on that. I know it's hard. It seems like if you get less than the past that you're doing something wrong. Odds are it's not that you're doing something wrong, it's just my budget can't afford to go higher. you can ask me questions about this on chat later or individually. But I do really want to stress that because that is something that is different for those of you who applied for a long time and a reality, unfortunately. How do we decide who gets funded? Well, as many of you know, NYSCA has a long-standing review process that dates to really the beginning of the agency in 1960, and it goes a little like this. You work very hard on your application, and you submit it through New York State's Grants Gateway and the NYSCA website. First, it's reviewed by staff, and in this case, that's just me in the Architecture and Design program. So I'm going to first make sure you've met all the eligibility requirements, all those points before, that you have a paid staff, that you've submitted the required documents, that you're pre-qualified by the application deadline. I'm not addressing the details of pre-qualification in this webinar. However, New York State does require all applicants to be pre-qualified through the Grants Gateway by the application deadline. If this is a foreign language to you, if you don't know what I mean by Grants Gateway, then when you get off this webinar, go to grantsreform.ny.gov and sign up through there, because you have a process you must go through before you can apply to us. I'm going to then, once I've checked everything in, I'm going to finally sit down and I'm going to read all of your applications, and I'm going to take copious notes, being very critical of your request, because that's my job, to be critical. I am also then going to make those applications and your supporting documents available to 7 individuals who will be making their way to our offices a few weeks later to review your applications. Panelists are listed on our website. I don't identify the specific 7 coming to review your requests, but we don't have next year's panelists online right now. It's the last year's list if you wish to look at it. We're still in the process of nominating and putting forward to our board, our council, our recommendations for our panel for this next year. But suffice to say, I try to curate a very diverse panel representing large and small institutions, representing all across New York State, and representing what I find to be the very diverse mix of applicants in the architecture and design program, which include, and forgive me if I leave anyone out, they include historic sites whose primary mission is really interpreting the architecture or design of that site, preservation organizations, historic cemeteries, community design centers, organizations that do services to the field, workshops or seminars for the field. I'm probably missing someone in there. I hope I didn't miss your organization. I do know you apply. Architecture festivals is another kind of area that comes in. So there's a wide mix, and I try to make sure that panel reflects that background. When the panelists are here, they're assessing your request based on NYSCA's 3 primary criteria: artistic, programmatic, managerial, fiscal, and service to the public. The application, as you work on it, is also organized that way. The panelists are rating each of those 3 criteria on a very broad scale, a 1 to 9 scale. It's a secret here that when I instruct the panel, I urge them to use that scale widely. I also tell them that I think a 9 should be very, very rare. It should be used sparingly when an application or an organization is so exemplary you find nothing to be critical about, no constructive criticism to provide. I can say that ever since NYSCA started using this 1 to 9 scale, which I guess is about 5 or 6 years, and all of the programs I oversee, there's never been an organization to receive a solid 9. And if you want to contemplate that, you know that I run the museum program as well. There is no museum that's received a solid 9. So I'm very pleased with that. That means to me the panel is doing its job. They're really thinking very carefully about your application and really being critical, not to be mean, but to help you as an organization and to make the tough decisions they're here to do, which is to use that scale to determine who can get funded. We receive 2 to 3 times the dollar amount of the money I have to give out, so not everyone can receive funding. And that's sadly the reality of applying to NYSCA. The panel scores are average, so each application gets 1 overall score. We as a panel take a look at those high to low towards the end of our couple days of discussion, and we don't leave it at that. We go back to making sure that those numbers, those bureaucratic numbers, accurately reflect the discussion they have. So I or any of those panelists can re-discuss a request. I might think a score is too high or too low based on the notes I've taken. I, by the way, am not a voting member of the panel. I am in the room. I may throw out leading questions if I believe the panel has not discussed some element of the request that I think is critical to the discussion. I have the prerogative at the end to ask them to revisit something. If I think something, say, is higher than my notes reflect, it may be that I didn't type fast enough and I missed notes. That has happened, and so we go back over the request and I capture those notes. It may be instead that it's the time of day that request was discussed. It was rated higher because they were hungry and they wanted to go to lunch. It was rated lower because it was the first one and they were super critical. We go back over all those. We revisit some. We re-rate them if necessary to make sure the narrative and the score are in sync and that no one is in a difficult position in their assessment because they were first or last, or when everybody got hungry, or when everyone needed coffee. I'm very aware that there's human factor in here, so we take multiple times to look at your application, and the panel is very thorough, very sincere, and I assure you your requests are looked at in a very thorough and fair manner. The panel leaves by telling me where they draw the line, the lowest score they believe should be funded. I then have to step back and balance the program budget with this category, the project support category, our independent projects category, and the re-grant program that is managed on our behalf by the Preservation League. So that takes me a few days to see how much money I have left in the budget and how I can reflect the scores and be as fair as possible. Those funding recommendations are then presented to a committee made up of our council members. A representative of the panel joins me at that meeting where the council may ask questions. And then finally, the full council meets, and it's not until they meet and approve the recommendations of the panel that a grant is made. So the meat and potatoes, which is a strange thing for a vegetarian to say, is the application narrative, or what we want to know about your organization. As I mentioned, the narrative is arranged by our 3 criteria. Artistic programmatic is the first criteria. There are 5 questions in this section, and I should point out the guidelines are live on our website at arts.ny.gov. You can go to guidelines, architecture and design, general operating support, and you can read everything, all the questions that will be asked and the materials that you will be required to provide. So there are 5 questions. This includes, you'll need to provide a history of your organization, links to your website and any social media. You're going to have a space to summarize your programming or initiatives for the next 2 years. I understand that each question is going to have actually 4,000 characters. I want to say, don't feel you have to use the full 4,000 characters. Some questions may need that and some may not. So don't feel you need to fill the space. Be thoughtful in how you answer all of these questions. I have 3 here, this is the most of the 3 sections, that are the ones that I think trip people up the most, and that's why I want to tackle them briefly. The second question in this section is the artistic cultural vision. This is one that organizations have trouble with. So the way I kind of summarize it is, remember that we are the New York State Council on the Arts. We were founded to support arts and culture. I always say that I could take probably any organization that wants to apply and very clearly state that organization's artistic cultural vision. Unfortunately, I can't do that for all of you. You need to be able to do that. So think about what your institutional vision is and think about how it's framed within the mission of the New York State Council on the Arts. I find it's more of a challenge when I wear my museum hat for, say, science museums to answer this question. But this is a critical one to connect what you do to our mission. And again, I think any design field represented can make that case. One way to tie it back is always to tie it back to the 3 priorities of this program. Evaluation, question number 4. It's rare that I ever see an answer that really gets to this. Evaluation can be hard, evaluation can be costly. We're not saying you have to spend lots of money on this, but think carefully about how you evaluate your programs and how you take that evaluation to make changes in those programs or initiatives. And what I mean by this is quantitative evaluation is less compelling if it's simply how many people came to the program or how many people said they like it. If that's what all you do, then absolutely articulate that. But if you do something more qualitative, that's stronger always. We want to know how you know your programs are running well or what you can do to improve them. Sometimes, and it's going to lead to the changes and challenges, both evaluation and changes and challenges are asking you maybe to show the warts of your organization. Number 5, changes and challenges. It might be really hard for you to feel that you can tell a funder that something isn't perfect. But every institution has its challenges or significant changes that may become challenges. You should feel very confident to be able to address these, address through evaluation where you seek to always improve, how you always seek to do the best you can, addressing changes and challenges, anything you want to share with us. For me, a request that says not applicable in number 5 is a problematic request. Any organization that tells me everything is perfect, I'm going to be honest, that tells me there's something deeply wrong at that institution, because no institution is perfect. Your challenge might not be a great one, it might be a modest one, but there's something that you're always addressing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's the fact that you don't have enough staff, or you wish you had more money, or you're having problems with folks coming to specific programs, your infrastructure isn't what you need. I'm sure there's many challenges you face, so make sure you take the time to admit that to us, and importantly, tell us how you seek to address that. Those are some of the most compelling applications that can say, hey, this is a problem we have, here's how we're tackling it. There was an institution once that was having some real fiscal problems, showing those deficits we don't like to see, and they addressed it head on in changes and challenges with not just, we're going to raise some money, very detailed steps, but the many different ways they were tackling this issue and how they had made progress on it. And that was very compelling to the panel, and they were successful in their application, even though they were not financially sound at that moment. Happily, when they came back in, they had resolved that, so they were very truthful in their efforts. So definitely show us your challenges. Managerial fiscal is the second section. There are 6 questions in this section. It's particularly critical to general operating support. They address your staffing, governance, your facilities, your institutional and succession planning, your finances, and the fees you pay for any artists, architects maybe in this case, or designers and consultants. If your organization has a long-range or strategic plan, you're encouraged to address where you are in that plan and how well your organization has met its goals to this point. If you use some other tool, if you don't have a formal long-range plan, if you're using any kind of roadmap for your organization, don't just tell us you have it, tell us how you're using it and where you are and any stumbling blocks you have and how you're going to meet those. In this section, finances. That's a huge one. This is where people trip up. If you are showing any deficits or surplus in your organizational budget for the past 3 years or in your projected budget, which is your application budget, use this section to explain to us how you will be either solving that deficit issue or why you have a surplus. NYSCA can't fund deficits per se, and if an organization, so you can't say you're helping us fund the deficit. That should not be the narrative. And if you're showing recurring surplus, the question becomes why you need NYSCA. So explain why it's there. This is a section, again, to provide a greater narrative expansion on your budget. Service to the public, there are 4 questions in this section. You're going to be asked to define your audience, discuss marketing, including online efforts, and audience development. I want to stress define your audience for a second to say that your organization may be open to the general public, but really serve a specific audience more so than others. You should tell us who that is so that we know that you know who you're serving, and you can talk about who you want to reach and how you're reaching out to them. It's important for us to see that you know who your audience is and that you're reaching them in a way that makes sense for that audience. Community contact question number 15. This is a question sometimes people just say not applicable to. This isn't, not applicable is not an acceptable answer to this question. I'm going to say it again, not applicable is not an acceptable answer to this question. You shoot yourself in the foot in your analysis if you say that here. We want to know any other organizations that provide similar activities in your area. It might be your town, your region, what they do supports or differs from what you do, and we want to know anybody you work with. So you can say, hey, there's nobody within miles that does what we do. Here are the different organizations we collaborate with. Everybody can answer this question with something. We want to know that you understand how you fit sort of in the ecosystem of where you're located. And we want to see who you play well with, who you collaborate with, because that's something I think probably every institution does. Supporting materials. The following are required. Resumes or biographical statements of up to 3 staff. Please keep them to no more than 1 page each. If you do a biographical statement, make sure what you include is relevant to your institution. Sometimes folks summarize their CVs in a way that doesn't make sense why they're working at this institution, so make sure it highlights the relevant parts. We want to see an organizational chart, even if you're small. There's easy templates online you can do. If you have a long-range and strategic plan, that is optional, but we encourage you to submit it. And I'm going to note that number 16 is a question that says list what you're submitting, and that may seem bizarre to all of you, but that's how I know you've read this, that you know you are required to send supporting documents, and that I should be definitely looking for you to have submitted them. With that, I'd really like to open this up to some questions which I see have already come in, and I absolutely appreciate that. So you may or may not see a ghost on the bottom right of your screen, which is me opening my chat box. I'm going to start asking the questions folks have posed. I will not identify who you are, so don't worry about that. Please keep sending questions in by chat. So let me just scroll down. Question number 1 is the deadline going to be in April? I wish I had an actual answer for you. The deadline has not yet been determined. This is what I can tell you. It is anticipated that the application will go live within 2 weeks, and it is anticipated that the deadline will either be the very end of March, like the 30th or 31st, or the very beginning of April. I have requested that it not be April 1st because I think that's sort of a cruel joke to have April Fool's Day, the application deadline. So it's going to be probably before April 10th, which was last year's deadline. And that's the best, unfortunately, I can provide to you now. Please definitely stay tuned on our website. I was also asked if there will be a webinar for the facilities program. There will. Some of you may know that I, for 5 years, was the director also of the facilities program. I'm happy to say that there have been a few promotions at NYSCA, including my colleague Kristin, who worked with me in architecture and design as a program officer and as a program officer in facilities. Kristin is now the director of arts education and facilities, and she's working on setting up webinars for a webinar for facilities today. So that email will be going out soon. There will definitely be one. The NYSCA deadline actually used to be March 1st for many years. Someone mentioned that it used to be April 1st. For many, many years, it was March 1st. For the past 5 or so years, we've been mucking around with that. I'm sorry, it's out of my hands. It's been moving around. I'm open for more questions. I have some more time. Just use the chat box on your screen to send me the question. I do have a couple more questions I'm going to ask and answer, but please feel free to keep sending more in. A question is, will I get the amount I ask for? So, not to sadden any of you, but it's generally unlikely you will get exactly what you ask for. As I mentioned, the program receives well more than the budget. The budget for the architecture and design program, by the way, is just over $1.1 million, which was we received a 25% increase to the program last year, which was fantastic. We finally got back over $1 million. But even with $1.1 million, typically the requests to the program are at least double, if not more. So, as I mentioned earlier, the factor on how much one receives depends on the analysis by the panel, your rating, depends on the size of your budget, it depends on how many solid applications come in and how much money I have left to divide. What I can always say is we can't give you more than you ask for, but we are allowed to give you less than you ask for. So you should ask for an amount that you need, not so much that it begs questions about your viability, but do be aware that you may be successful but not for what you asked for. Question, if we receive NYSCA regrants from the Preservation League or other arts groups, does that need to be listed on prior grants from NYSCA? Oh, that's a good question. The budget line that asks for prior grants from NYSCA are direct NYSCA grants, so you would not list the regrants. I do want to note, I'm not sure that this is this organization's actual question. Regrants from our partner, the Preservation League, are absolutely fine. Anyone on this call can apply for Preserve New York or technical assistance from the Preservation League. By the way, those are live and open right now. So if you are interested in historic structures reports, cultural landscape reports, historic resources surveys, new this year building condition reports, or a building condition assessment through technical assistance, please reach out to the Preservation League of New York State. This question that came in, though, said other arts groups. So one thing I should note is if your organization applies to your local arts council, which is supported by NYSCA, you have a decision to make. If you apply to NYSCA by our late March, early April deadline, you will not be allowed to apply to your local arts council later in the year. That's regardless of whether you're successful with NYSCA or not. So the local arts council funding and NYSCA are the two things that cannot go hand in hand. Regrants from the Preservation League absolutely can. Question, is this year's application similar to last year's? In other words, can we start preparing the application before it goes live in the next few weeks? Absolutely, yes. The questions are all online at arts.ny.gov. Click on Guidelines, click on Architecture and Design, and then General Operating Support. Do not write more than 4,000 characters per question, and as I mentioned earlier, in case anyone didn't hear, you don't need to answer every question with 4,000 characters. The panel will appreciate that only when you really need to, when it needs that depth. We used to have 2,000 characters, but the gateway won't allow us to do 2,000. So you can start working on that right now and use your character count function in Word to prepare that. So absolutely get started on that now if you want. I think I have a question. I think I answered this before, but the question is the panel's decision based solely on our application and support materials? Yes, with the exception that if there's something in the public domain, like I used the example of a staff member leaving and a job search in place, if it's public information, then that can be added. I will share that with the panel, and I usually just see those announcements online, and that's something that they should know because it's critical. So if you have a general operating support application in play and you're about to announce a major departure, it doesn't hurt to make sure I see that press release because it's better for me to see it from you than to find it on my own. I don't hold that against you, but it's always better to communicate with me. I want to reinforce that the program doesn't fund restoration, preservation, or maintenance projects. I know we're architecture and design, but the program is much more programmatically focused, more on educational, interpretive programs, workshops. This is really because in 1987, legislation was passed that allows the agency to fund capital projects related to buildings primarily, but that legislation is so incredibly detailed, it impacts what we can and cannot fund, and so this program is centered on organizations providing more programmatic services and not direct restoration or preservation. Can you address the review of organizations' websites and social media activities is the next question. So as an attempt to simplify this application process for you all, and you may be guffawing because the Grants Gateway doesn't necessarily simplify anything, we stopped asking you to upload PowerPoints of images of your institution because your online presence is what the public sees, and that's what the panel wants to see. So the panel is encouraged to look at the websites and social media in advance of the meeting. I definitely do, and I take notes. So for example, if your organization says you're on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, and you make a case that that's your strong social media presence, and I go look, and you haven't posted in 6 months, or you have very few people, very few friends on Facebook, I'm going to make a note of that for that to come up in the panel discussion. So how you use, so if you are not active in social media, you should just tell us that. Don't make us think you are. If you're very active in one particular forum, let us know. So I'm going to look at them all. I'm going to take notes. If the panel hasn't brought it up, I'm going to address it. And it's really just a way to get that visual sense of your organization. So it may not be directly analyzed during the meeting in a verbal, but it's the way that we have that visual sense, and we're going to pull your website up during our panel discussion. At the moment, I think that's the last question in my queue. So if anyone else has questions, please open the chat box. Send me a question via chat. I've kind of exhausted the questions that I see. I'm going to give you a minute. Otherwise, I thank you for the question. Will we be able to download the webinar afterwards? Great question. So shortly after this webinar concludes, maybe 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to get a link to the recording, and I will have a staff member who works on our website post that recorded link on the NYSCA website. So yes, go to arts.ny.gov. On our homepage, scroll about halfway down, and you're going to start seeing links to these recorded webinars. Right now, the one for the independent projects for individual architects and designers is up. This one will go up hopefully later today. I will tip you all off. It does require that you have to do another temporary download like you might have done today for this webinar. Oddly, I can't actually play these webinars back on my own computer here in the office because of some restrictions from New York State, but other people can, and I can do it at home. So just be aware that you have to download another application in order to play it. If anyone wants to listen to this later and you have difficulty doing so, you should email me. I'm going to make sure you have all my information. There it is on the screen now. If you have any trouble accessing that recording, shoot me an email. I'm trying to keep track of whether people are having trouble with that because it would be possible for us to put it in a different format. It's just a bit time-consuming. So we're hopeful that you'll be able to just easily access the temporary application it requires. With that, I'm not seeing other questions at the moment. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. I want to remind you of a few things. You can ask me questions at any time. You see how to reach me by my email or my phone. Once the application goes live, I may not be able to answer the questions you have to the same level. Meaning, once the application goes live, NYSCA staff are no longer supposed to talk content. We can only talk technical issues. So I tell everyone, always ask me questions, but please don't be upset if the applications have gone live and I have to say I'm not at liberty to discuss that. So if you have questions formulating, I highly encourage you to reach out to me before February 22nd. That's around the time we're hoping to make the application live. The best way to do that is to shoot me an email first. If you can ask me the question via email, I sometimes check in the evening at home and answer questions. I don't publicize that, but I do sometimes. But more importantly, if you want to talk to me, it's best for us to schedule that time via email so that we're not playing phone tag with each other. So please feel free to reach out to me with any questions you have. Check our website to be sure when the application comes live. There should be an e-blast as well, but I don't want anyone to miss that. Make sure your organization is pre-qualified in the Grants Gateway, and it remains pre-qualified up until the actual minute the application closes. 1 minute past the application deadline, a list is generated from the Grants Gateway website to let us know who's not pre-qualified, and we have no choice in the matter. If you're not pre-qualified, your application is thrown out, not to cause fear and panic, but that's just the reality of the state right now. There will also be tools for you on our website coming up soon to navigate the Grants Gateway, which is not what I'm skilled at, but the person here who is very good at making it very clear will be putting up a handbook and possibly some YouTube videos as well. So stay tuned for that on our website. Thank you again for joining me. Hope you all have a great day. Ask me questions anytime. Thanks. Bye.